Uh, Today we'll discuss about AWS Redshift and why someone needs to learn AWS Redshift. And once you learn Redshift, and once you land a job in the same technology, what are you going to do as a database administrator or a data engineer? And in order to do so, and what are all the topics or the concepts that you need to learn as part of AWS Redshift course. So first of all, why someone needs to learn AWS Redshift? So there are four primary reasons, and the very prominent one is the dominance in data warehousing market share. So as you all know, Amazon Web Services is one of the leading cloud providers, and it has a significant market share when compared with Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure. And there are a couple of other companies also where they provide cloud computing or cloud services, but AWS is a leading partner. So, and a lot of companies, when I say companies, they could fall under Fortune 500 companies and many small to medium companies. Most of the companies that use AWS as their cloud services, they tend to use AWS Redshift as their uh, database service. And in AWS Redshift, it also provides a lot of career opportunities in cloud data warehousing. So, in the current era, as you all know, uh, there is a strong demand for cloud-based solutions, and the reason for that is with the increased demand for the computing machines or the different kinds of services that are required for a organization to run, so they need a lot of technical infrastructure. So this is provided by Amazon, and Redshift is one of the services, and there are like 100 plus other services which companies use for different purposes. So there are few technologies or services which are required for software development, some services for data storage and processing, some services for data analytics and machine learning, and similarly there are other services that are provided, and accordingly based on their requirement, companies they host their infrastructure on AWS and subscribe to the required service. So in this aspect, as AWS has significant market share, and so does the career opportunities. So as a lot of companies incorporate AWS and Redshift, and accordingly they will be needing professionals who are well versed, or they have a technical knowledge on the how to manage a Redshift cluster, or how to work with a Redshift cluster. And the next very important point is integration with AWS ecosystem. So just like I have mentioned, AWS has 100 plus services that are subscribed by multiple big companies. So when you have all your infrastructure on a single cloud service, it is very easy to interact with one another. So when some company is building an application, so they can have their um, application hosted on AWS computing services, and then it can directly interact with, or whatever the data that particular application is producing, it can be connected to storage services like Redshift, S3, and we also have some other storage services like MongoDB, which are part of AWS ecosystem. So it becomes very easy to build those pipelines to send the data from one service to another, and to integrate with the um, business intelligence tools like QuickSight or Tableau or other BI services available. So having everything on AWS, it the integration, the connection, creating the pipelines, and one application communicating with other application, it becomes very easy. So that is one added advantage. You can so when you're working in a real world, you don't just work with Redshift. There are other some tools or services that you need to interact with, and when it is all hosted on AWS, it will be very easy for you to work with each and every service that you will be working on. And the next point is community support and resources. So AWS is a big cloud provider, and when there are launching a certain service or making some upgrades to the service, they will be providing lot of self-help documentation. So when you're stuck with certain issue, there's some tech issue which you're not able to resolve on your own, so there is a lot of support provided by AWS with respect to providing documentation resources. And on YouTube you can also see AWS videos hosted, so we can go there and see and get the help. And also they have a dedicated community portal. So when someone is posting something with certain details, experts in that or people who have already worked on the similar issue will be checking and responding to that. So the help that we get will be little faster, and will have all the help that we need to resolve a certain issue. So considering this, where we have significant market share, where we have career opportunities, and where it is easy to integrate with other AWS services, and when we have required support, it only makes sense to learn something that has future growth. So considering that, one can definitely learn Redshift, and it will definitely help them in growing their career or moving to data side of it. And on this part, does anyone have any questions?
Sudhakar,
Yeah.
what are the AWS services that interact with Redshift, Sudhakar?
So the main purpose of having a database is you need some place where you can store your data. Okay. So the
Mm,
first thing is the application to the database connection. So the database here would be Redshift. So let's say we can take an example of Facebook or Instagram. So as users, we see the front end when we launch the application, but when we are interacting with the application, we log in or we like something, we share something, all that data is stored in some database, no? So for every application there will be a backend database, and Redshift is one of them. So it can communicate with the client application. And once you have the data, what is the purpose of having the data, storing the data? So it is used by product managers, program managers, business analysts to analyze the data and make some sense of out of it, and see how the customer behavior is, how the customer experience is. And for different analytical purpose, the data is used to increase the business or to grow the business. And how do they do that? So one is you can so once the data is available, you should be able to query it, right? So you
yeah.
have in AWS you have something called Athena, you have something called Glue. So these are two services where you can build pipelines and retrieve the required data from Redshift. And you can also
Uh,
connect with the other let's say third party what we say tools, where you can connect to the Redshift cluster and get the data. And another important service that integrates with Redshift is QuickSight. So many companies or senior leaders, they need some data to understand how the business is growing or trending with respect to dashboards. So when someone wants to build some dashboard, they need the backend data in QuickSight, and they can connect QuickSight with Redshift to get the data and have build those visuals. So these are some of the example uh, services, but there are many more that can interact with Redshift.
Yeah. Basically, how the data get into the Redshift using AWS services, Sudhakar? Which services it uses to get data into the Redshift?
So there are multiple services to do that. So one of them is I'm not sure if you're aware of Amazon Firehose, and so some applications or some developers design an application so that the first set of data goes into a MongoDB or a S3 as a first um, data collection, and from there data can be moved to Redshift using data pipelines. So there will be certain tools where we can do that, and our job starts once we get the data into the Redshift. And once we get the data, or how we configure the cluster, how we configure our querying, how we manage our cluster, that will be the main agenda of this course. But there are certain tools where, with the help of which, we'll get the data into Redshift, and from there we will know on how to work with the data.
Yeah, yeah, got it. Sudhakar,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, actually, Sudhakar, I have a question. What is the best way to transfer from on-prem to Redshift? I mean, data migration. What is the best way?
Hmm. So even in this, so when a certain company wants to migrate their data, let's say there is some on-premises clusters or environment that particular company's data is hosted. So you cannot directly migrate it to Redshift, but there are certain ways. So one is, there is a set of services called Snow Family. So what they do is, um, either the data can be transferred physically, literally physically. Some authorized personnel from AWS will come. If you're subscribed to that service, they will collect your data and make sure it is compatible with the hosting on AWS infrastructure. Let's say Redshift in this instance. So that is one way of transferring. And there is one more way, which is called a data migration service. There's a service called DMS. Even using that service, you will be able to migrate data from your on-premises cluster to Redshift, or it could be any other services. So there are few ways of doing it, and yeah, that's how you can migrate data.
Yeah, and actually, I have checked in the Google. It says we can do by using federated queries or DB link. Is it possible through that?
In doing so, there are also some third-party companies which will
Okay.
provide these services. Maybe those are those kind of services. But yeah, the ideal way, or the most secured way, will be to do the data transfer through trusted services, and the best part will be using some of the AWS already existing services.
Okay. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Sudhakar, I just want to check, like, these two are the, building blocks of data warehousing. When we talk about AWS on one side, and the other side when we talk about Azure, DevOps as well.
Hmm.
So, definitely they both have their own market share across, various companies across the world itself. So, I want to check, like, why would, if in case I'm third party, new company, why would I be going for AWS, rather than on a Microsoft side? Because I think all across Microsoft is the most user friendly softwares and easy to understandable. Why about AWS only? Why should we go to AWS?
Hmm. So that's a something. So when a certain company is trying to move away from on-premises to cloud-based services, like you said, Microsoft Azure, so and Google Cloud, even IBM has one of the best cloud services provided. So all these have their own set of advantages and disadvantages in terms of the company's view. So let's say, um, so I have hosted some service, or my existing application is already interacting with some of the applications that are already hosted on AWS, let's say. Okay, so it only will make sense for me to go move to AWS. And I'm taking this example in terms of AWS, but if a certain company is already working with some Azure or Google Cloud, so it will only make sense for them to move to that particular cloud service partner, provided so moving the data or the application from one source to another, it's not a simple task. It involves very strict measures that needs to be taken with respect to ensuring this transfer is seamless, and there are security restrictions that are in place, and this plays very high crucial part in the data transfer or the application transfer. And and also the kind of skill set you have in your company, the personal you have in your company. So when you're making a decision, you will, or that particular company will do their own analysis and try to understand what each of these services is trying to offer with respect to the ease of hosting the applications, with respect to providing security measures after their services are hosted on it, and the kind of integration it has with other services that are provided. So it's not an easy decision, and not a something we can directly say, but it totally depends on what particular company has to do, or with respect to their goals, or with respect to their already existing policies. There are certain things like that, but with respect to the kind of services that are offered from each of these primary partners, it is more or less similar, I can say. So what if there is a certain service in AWS, the same kind of service is offered by Google Cloud and Azure also. So
Hmm.
it only makes sense for the businesses to make their own business plans and act accordingly. But yeah, at a high level, I think everyone provides almost all the things that are provided. But if you're
Yeah.
already working on something on AWS, yeah, then it will make sense to host your applications on AWS.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you because, that's first the competition will come, and definitely the second part is that, the market players who leads it, they grab the opportunity. Now, coming back
Mhm.
to this Redshift here. So when we talk about Redshift, now, is it a kind of, on a high level, if you can tell us, because, definitely you'll be walking us through what exactly is it, what are the course contents which you'll be covering it going forward. But as a Redshift altogether, is it like a data migration from, on premises to cloud? Is that part is all about Redshift, or it is about, you know, creating a cluster, maintaining the data, kind of database management side? So what is Redshift all about?
Yeah, you're right. The second part is the right explanation. So Redshift is a database or a data warehouse, we can say. So it will have certain clusters based on the configuration that we are setting at the time of launching it. And so what we will be learning in this course is how to launch the cluster, how to configure the cluster, and how do we load the data into Redshift. So once we have the cluster ready, so we need to have the data from some source, right? So it could be any of the source. And once we have the data, how do we what we say, how do we manage it, or we can say we need to know the architecture of Redshift on how it stores, how someone can optimize the data storage, how can someone optimize the retrieval of the data, and how do you manage the workload management. So once you have the data ready in an organization, multiple teams or multiple people will be querying the data. And if the demand is high, when I say demand, if more people are querying the data at the same point of time and which exceeds the capacity of your cluster, then how do you manage it, or how do you um, in case of any disaster, so for some reason, let's say at some place where your cluster is being hosted, so if that impacts, how do you immediately recover your data, how do you immediately host this data on some other region, so or getting another cluster ready for your data, or for your application to work without any issue. So this is more of a data warehousing service where you store the data, where you can create pipelines or create communications with other services, and how do you effectively manage data that is stored in Redshift cluster.
Yeah, Sudhakar, basically Redshift is an RDBMS database, right?
Yes, correct.
We can store Mongo is basically it's a JSON format. The data is in the JSON format. No? It supports JSON data as well in Redshift.
No, Redshift as of now it supports only relational data, which where the data is stored in a table structure. So Mongo is a NoSQL DB, or where we don't have a certain structure. That's why JSON is used, and it can go to multiple loops or multiple nested fields. For that, a Mongo is used. And when you have some any kind of data, then someone can use S3. So S3 can host any kind of data, and there are certain mechanisms on how you can retrieve, how you can analyze that data. So yeah, for different use cases and for different kinds of data types, different databases are available, and Redshift is a RDBMS, relational database.
Yeah. We can migrate from Mongo to Redshift. Is there possibility to migrate data
You
from
you,
Mongo to
you
Redshift?
can do that, but in that process, you need to transform your data into table structure. So
Okay.
the
Okay.
final data that is coming into Redshift should be in a table structure.
Yeah. Yeah. Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Sudhakar.
Hello.
Yeah, hi, Sudhakar. I'm audible.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, what is the difference between Oracle DB and Redshift DB? What is the purpose?
Mm, I'm not sure if I can share much detail on that because I have very limited work experience directly working with Oracle. Um, but something which I can share about Redshift is uh, so just like most of the points that I have already covered. So if you already have most of
Yes,
your
right.
services on AWS, and if you are not sure on the type of clusters or the capacity of the clusters, if you're not sure, then Redshift, one good thing about Redshift is it can be a serverless service also. So when I say serverless, I think most of you are already aware of it or might have heard about this term called serverless. So where you don't need to configure the essential details in advance. So as your data grows, as per the requirement, your database is scaled automatically and you're built accordingly. So when you're launching a new company and when you're not sure on how much capacity you need to reserve, basically when you're launching a cluster, so you need to or you will be kind of reserving it for 1 year or 3 years. So when you're buying clusters, we have these two different plans. um, So for that, there will be a defined amount of money that AWS charges. And when you're building a company and when you're not sure that if your business is going to scale, and if you launch a small size cluster, and if because of some reason if it scales drastically, then you will lose on the data. So the cluster which is already there, it will not have the enough capacity to allocate the incoming data. And if you're launching the cluster with high capacity, and if your business doesn't grow, then it is waste of money. You're not utilizing your entire resources to the optimum. So then it's not a good business scenario. So when someone or when a company is in a situation like that, they can go for serverless, where the servers will be scaling as per the incoming volume of data. So it will automatically take care. And another uh, thing is, so the kind of data structure or how it is stored on database is different for Oracle and Redshift. So Oracle is a row level storage, so, and Redshift is a columnar level storage. And I can share more details about this in the session. But the
Yeah.
best thing about columnar or data storage is, like, if you have a table with, let's say, 100 row, or sorry, 100 columns or 100 different data fields, and when if someone is working for a big company, so I haven't even seen tables where there are 200 plus columns in a single table. So Oracle DB, when you query on that, even for small amount of duration or small duration of time, it has to scan all the records that are in the table, and the kind of input output operations or the kind of memory processing will be very high. But in terms of Redshift, so when you have a table that has, let's say, 100 plus columns, and if you need only two or three columns, you don't need the entire data to analyze, you just need few columns. So it will scan only those particular columns and get the data. So because of this, the kind of input output scans or the processing will be very minimal, and hence Redshift is like almost 10 times faster than the regular row level processing DBs.
Yeah. Okay.
And another different, not a difference, but with respect to security, I think AWS gives utmost importance to the security of the data that is stored. So yeah, with respect to technical terms, I can see these as some differences. But on Oracle, so I have limited information on that. But yeah,
Yeah, okay. I have another question.
yeah.
Yeah, I have some. Now I am working on SQL. Okay. If I
Okay.
learn AWS Redshift means, how is the growth and how is the career and how is the opportunities?
So
Is Redshift is enough? One more question I add on. Is Redshift is enough? I have to add on some more course into it. So I suggested some people to learn with Red Python. All of these. What is the add-on courses you have to learn after learning the Redshift?
it totally depends on the kind of role that you will be working on in a company. So let's
Okay.
say there is a data analyst or a business analyst, let's say. Okay. So only concepts that you need to know when working with Redshift is how to query the data, how to optimize your query as per the architecture of Redshift, and uh, how to basically analyze your query performance. So these things should be enough for you to query the data as a data analyst. So the only thing you'll be doing is connecting to the Redshift cluster or server and retrieving the data. So that's only you'll be doing. And in terms of database administrator, so when a company has a database administrator working for Redshift, so their main objective or a job role is to maintain that particular cluster. So with respect to creating cluster configuration, And with respect to maintaining the cluster, so like I have said, in a real world scenario, cluster will be very busy. There will be a lot of incoming data, there will be a lot of incremental jobs, and there will be a lot of delta jobs. So delta jobs are, it's a, let's say there's a new table coming into the database, those are called delta. And incremental is, so you have an existing table, but on a daily basis you will get the new data on based on how your business is doing, right? So it needs to handle that kind of data. That's an inflow. And outflow is where someone like a program manager, product manager, or a business analyst, data analyst, they retrieve the data to analyze the data. So when this much of uh, um, interaction is happening with the Redshift cluster, it really gets busy, and sometimes it may become unresponsive. So in order to avoid that, database administrators need to exactly know how to manage the data, how to create those pipelines, and at different time intervals, how to every cluster or every type of database, every company will have a maintenance window. So it could be a weekly um, task or a monthly task depending on their how busy their cluster is. So during this time, the cluster is maintained, cleaned, and much of unused space is made available. So all these kind of even the security or granting access to the new users, these kind of activities are performed by database administrator. So for a DBA, only learning AWS Redshift should be good. And if you're working for a company as a data engineer, um, so then you need to know how to create schemas, how to create tables, how to create or modify the data from moving the data from one source to another. Let's say like someone has quoted an example on how to transfer data from MongoDB, which is in JSON format, to the Redshift cluster. So the job of a data engineer is to create a Python script or create some SQL code where the data in JSON format is transformed into a structured format with only the data that is required in that particular table. So, as a data engineer, you need to know little more uh, services or skill in addition to Redshift. So, when some company is working on only Redshift, and if they are hiring a data engineer, so they need to know in and out of Redshift, and they need to have some extra skill also on how to get the data, how to transform the data, and how to move the data from one source to another. So it totally depends on how much of Redshift you need to learn based on the role you're in, or based on the company needs.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I think whatever that I want to cover in the next slides, you have already got that as part of your questions. Some of the next slides may be repeated, which you might have already heard, which I've just said. But yeah, let's continue. So who can learn AWS Redshift? So basically, anyone interested in cloud data warehousing can learn, and it is beneficial for people just like we discussed. It could be database or data warehouse developers, administrators, data engineers, BA engineers, data analysts. So depending on the role someone is in and how much of knowledge they need to have in order to do their job, so all these people need to have certain amount of knowledge on Redshift based on their roles. So anyone in those roles, if the company or the company they want to move to has this kind of infrastructure hosted on Redshift and has a database in Redshift, then they need to learn Redshift. And once you are a DB or a database engineer, what are all the things that you will be doing in a day-to-day job role or as part of your job roles and responsibilities? So the obvious part is, first, if a company doesn't have a Redshift cluster, or if they want to move from one type of DB to another DB, so the first thing will be, we need to install the Redshift service and we need to configure Redshift service. So with respect to configure, so the kind of cluster you need, how many nodes you need, and what type of processing you need. So there are multiple factors in deciding what will be the optimal type of cluster for respect to business. They'll be deciding and configuring that accordingly and launching a cluster. So once a cluster is created, we need to create databases, we need to create request tables and schemas, and all these things we will not be anyone will not be doing in a single instance. So as the business develops, or whenever there is a new requirement, or whenever there is a new project, so then there will be requirement to create new tables, new schemas, or new database. So it doesn't happen regularly, but whenever there is some requirement in the company, then uh, the respective person will be creating tables, schemas, and databases. So once you have the table created, you need to have the data into it, and we'll learn about how to load and unload data. Basically, as a DB or a DB engineer, you need to perform this task on loading and unloading the data into Redshift cluster. And performance tuning and optimization. So just like we have discussed, when the cluster gets busy, when multiple people are or multiple services are interacting with Redshift, then you need to have the ideal performance tuning so that it runs very effectively without any interruptions. Monitoring and alerting. So these are something we can configure. So let's say you have a cluster, you have a 10 node Redshift cluster, and whenever the processing or the uh, CPU it goes beyond 70% of usage, then it needs to alert the respective person who is in charge of managing that cluster, so that they can take some action on that. So that comes in monitoring, alerting, and this will be done by respective DB people. And backup and recovery, so you need to every company does this. All the data needs to be backed up in case of any unforeseen situation. And I what I mean by unforeseen situations is, these are very rare cases. So when uh, Amazon has so in India, Amazon has data centers in Mumbai, Hyderabad, I think there may be a few more locations. So let's say there is some earthquake somewhere where they have this data center. So there's a probability that the data will be lost if it is very severe. So to avoid those kind of situations, and if you're not prepared, believe me, like companies, they will go haywire. Like, it will be very difficult for companies to recover the data, and even if they can recover the data, their entire business will come to a stall. It will be on hold, and that will have a impact on all the shareholders, on everybody involved in that company. So no one would want to have that kind of situation, and hence all the companies will have a backup of data, and how they can recover it very instantly. Let's say some data center is down, and you need to already have configuration set up that within some clicks you can host your data or get your cluster ready in another location. Let's say if something happens in North America, they should be able to recover that data and get that cluster ready in India. So that's an example. And security management. So how do you configure that your clusters are secured, and other applications, or the applications within your um, uh, within AWS, when there are multiple applications interacting with your DB, which is Redshift, how do you configure, or how do you secure your data from the unwanted access, I can say, or unwanted attacks, data attacks that happen, or ingestions, data ingestions. So that comes under security management. And these are all the things that are done by a DB. But most of these things, in most of the companies, they will be already configured. They will already have a cluster, they will already have a security mechanism, they will already have a backup and recovery mechanism. But the job of a DB person will be to monitor the data, and whenever there's a requirement, they need to be able to create the database, they need to be able to create tables, they need to know how to load and unload the data, basically getting the data from different sources into Redshift, and from Redshift to other source as required, and monitoring and alerting. So these are some important steps. If not all, some of these things people will be doing as part of their daily jobs. And so the course agenda, so what we will be learning or what we will be covering uh, as part of this course. So we'll have an introduction to data warehousing, understanding what is data warehousing and how it is different from other kind of data services that are available. And how do we install and configure Redshift. uh, in that we'll have something called IAM role. We need to create AWS account, and we need to launch cluster. There are different steps involved in that, on installing and configuring Redshift cluster. We'll learn about that. And architecture, so Redshift architecture, understanding Redshift architecture is the utmost important thing we need to learn if we want to work with Redshift. Or this is also very important interview question. Let's say if you are learning the course and if you are applying for some company for a role which involves a Redshift skill, having a good understanding on the architecture is an important one. um, I wanted to cover the architecture, but based on the time that is left, I think we can move ahead. But yeah, we'll be discussing in detail about Redshift architecture once the course is started. And next we'll learn about performance features of Redshift. So what is massively parallel processing, what is columnar data storage, how is this data stored in terms of columns in the disks, and what is data compression. uh, and then we'll, so when a DBA or a database engineer designs tables, um, so based on the architecture of Redshift, how we need to create a table in Redshift is different from how we create table in some other databases like Oracle. So it has something called sort keys, distribution keys, which are very important on how we access the data, how data is distributed in the storage devices. So these two are important concepts that we will be learning. And compression encodings, of course, it is for compressing the data for faster retrievals or faster scanning. And yeah, so one of I'll cover this is important. So massively parallel processing is one of the important feature of Redshift. So when you have a cluster, and when you have a cluster with different kinds of nodes. So let's say I have a or I am launching a cluster, Redshift cluster with 10 nodes. So a node is nothing but a individual computing machine, we can say. So it has its own set of memory, it has its own set of storage, it has its own set of CPU, GPU, all the computing things which are needed for a single machine to work. It has all these configurations set up, and it has something called, within a single node, we have something called slices. As you can see in this visual, we each compute node is further divided into slices, and even these slices are allocated certain memory, certain processing time, or processing power. So what AWS does is, or Redshift does is, so whenever there is some data retrieval, let's say from a client using JDBC and ODBC connections, so that is first sent into leader node. So what leader node does is it will analyze the commands that are coming to it. Let's say, to keep it simple, let's say it's a SQL code to retrieve some data. So it will analyze on how these statements, SQL statement needs to be sent to each of these nodes based on sort keys, based on distribution keys, and where the data is available in the on those days. Accordingly, it will analyze, configure, and send those uh, subtasks to each of these computing nodes, and the processing happens parallelly. So a single query will run on multiple nodes, uh, giving a parallel processing. All the statements will be run parallelly, which will eventually lead to the faster processing of that query. So this is one of the important features of Redshift, and it's very important to learn this. And columnar storage, I think we can cover this in detail in the once the course starts. But this is also one of the important features, uh, based on which the speed or the processing time of Redshift is way higher than other traditional databases. So based on this architecture, the queries that we write, or the amount of data that is processed, will be minimal because of this column data storage feature. And next we'll learn about how to create DB and how to create tables. So just now we have learned about certain features, right? Like massive parallel processing, columnar storage, and we also saw about sort key and distribution key. So using those um, futures, how do we create a DB, how do we create schema, how do we create SQL codes. So all these things we'll be learning. And we'll also be learning about how to load the data into Redshift and how to unloading is basically sending data from one place to another. And workload management, so this is also one of the important interview concepts. And if someone wants to work on Redshift, this is also very important on how you configure your workload management. There are certain parameter groups, and concurrency scaling. Let's say you have a cluster. Let's say there is one cluster which is used for data retrieval, but as the demand for that, or more number of users are using it, where it reaches its optimum capacity or the maximum capacity, so how do you scale that particular cluster? How do you configure that? So one machine cannot process everything. Then you need, it should be able to scale your cluster based on the requirement. So how do you do that? How do you set that? So we'll learn about that. And the workload management can be automated. We can already set up something so that whenever certain situation arises, Redshift will be automatically able to take care of it using the automated workload management. And we also have something called short query acceleration. So let's say when someone is retrieving the data for entire year last year, and I am retrieving the data for only for yesterday. So my query is a very small query, and it can be run or executed very fast. But since the cluster is already busy processing big queries started or initiated by others, so it will have to just wait in the queue in a regular case scenario. But what Redshift does is, so it gives certain priority to short queries, where they don't need to wait until those big queries are executed, and this can with minimal amount of time those short queries can be executed. And
Yeah,
even roles, how do we monitor roles, this also we will learn. Sorry, someone has question.
yeah. What are the disadvantages of WLM?
Disadvantage, no, 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 it is. So let's say you don't have any workload management, and your cluster is running without any configurations. So
Yeah,
in a
if
real scenario, so based on how businesses work, you cannot have a free pass to all the teams to the uh, database. So you need to create queues, you need to have those configuration on how much of allocate or the kind of memory and resources are provided to each of the query. So that needs to be configured, and having workload management, it's only advantages. I don't see it having any disadvantages.
yeah, if
Not configured.
let me take a manual WLM. I
Mm-hmm,
have configured a, report user group. I mean, report parameter, and
mm-hmm,
I have allocated the memory of 60%.
mm-hmm,
When I have allocated to default queue, I have allocated 5% of memory.
mm-hmm,
I was running a query. The user is suppose the user is running a query and it goes to the default queue,
mm-hmm,
and 60% of memory is ideal.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, 5% of memory only it will take.
Yeah, yeah. So that's when you need to give that
User
partition
to the,
capacity. So
yeah.
when you
Mhm.
know, like when you in a certain queue, you'll have a good chunk of data retrieval, what we say, there is a request for data retrieval. And when you're already sure that in that particular query there are multiple users who will be querying the db at certain intervals, so we need to configure and give the required amount of resources accordingly. And when you are reserving some space, it needs to um, be for some specific purposes, right? So most of the or a majority of uh, the space or the resources needs to be given to the most frequent and and the higher number of people querying. Let's say there is some group, let's say analytics group, where there are certain amount of people, and they will be scheduling the queries or they will be manually running the queries. And you already know, when compared to other teams or other priority, the number of users or the amount of resources that is required for this particular team is high. So in that queue you need to accordingly configure the resources and give them required storage and processing or computing, uh, the kind of amount of resources that is needed to execute their queries. But yeah, if not done properly, like you have just mentioned, one part will be very busy while other part will be entirely free, entirely ideal.
Yeah, that is the case. Mm.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, that's not an advantage, disadvantages if you're not configure it right. If you don't understand your business and the kind of inputs that are coming to the DB, then it will create a chaos. Yeah, they need to analyze on how much amount of resources that needs to be given to each of the queues, and accordingly they need to create those rules.
Yeah, and for automated WLM, we have high, highest, low, lowest. what is the memory percentage that were occupied? I mean, for automated WLM.
Sorry, sir, I didn't get your question.
No, for auto WLM, there would be a four scenarios: high, highest, low, lowest. Okay,
Mhm.
what memory percent that would be allocated for high and highest and low, lowest?
What? Okay. This I'll get back to you. I'm not sure what's your name.
Naveen Kumar.
Naveen. Naveen. Okay. Okay. So I can get back to you on this, Naveen.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And anyone has any questions? We are almost running out of time. And yeah, let's move ahead with the next topics that will be covered. Uh, Another important concept is redshift spectrum. So where there is some data, archive data, or large amount of data that you don't need or you don't often query it. You will only need to query it once in a year or once in 6 months. So this that is not often queried. So it is with respect to cost, it is advised to store that data in S3. And when you have the data in S3 and if you want to access it through Redshift, so Redshift Spectrum, you can do it using the Redshift Spectrum, and we will learn about it also. And yeah, and we learn about system tables and views. And I mean, the last part about Redshift pricing, we will have a brief about that, about clusters and types. And basically pricing is defined based on the type of cluster, the number of clusters, and the amount of duration that you're going to reserve those nodes. Accordingly that will be defined. We'll learn briefly about that also. mm, yeah.
And
I
will
mean,
you be explaining about data share topic?
yeah, yeah. And
Any high level view on some data pipelines, mean to say glue or something?
yeah, I think we'll have these practical sessions, I guess, where we'll be uh, logging into AWS account. We'll be working on cluster and getting some hands on and getting the data into Redshift, either from S3 or from Glue. I think it's not required because um, it requires building some Python script to have the data from one source to other. But if there is already some data existing in some of the source where we can consume it, we can do that as part of an exercise.
Okay.
Okay. And basically, yeah, as part of Redshift management, we'll be learning about query monitoring, cluster performance, how to maintain, how to take backup, and we also have certain properties. We'll be discussing or learning about that also. Mm, yeah, I think that's it for the session. And yeah, before we close, any other questions?
So what would the course duration, Sudhakar?
It will be 30 to 45 days, but the institute will confirm you. Okay. Any other questions?
Will it be a practical sessions? I mean, after cluster creation, those kind of activities.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we will learn more about it, or we can learn better only when we have some hands-on, when we do something or working with the cluster directly, whatever the topics that we have just uh, covered. So we need to have those practical sessions, then only we'll get the best out of the course.
Sudhakar, what are the prerequisites required for this course, Sudhakar?
I think if you have some knowledge on SQL, structured query language, it's not a prerequisite, but if someone has already have some working knowledge on how to write SQL code, that might help, but it's not mandatory. And some knowledge on how a database or a database how works in real time. So, and again, these are not mandatory. If someone has some knowledge on this, it will be little easier for them to understand the concept. But yeah, even people without the knowledge also can learn. I think we'll be covering everything.
Yeah.
Something on top of
Sudhakar, if you don't mind, I would like to ask one thing.
Yeah.
Uh, Before you directly came to Redshift, Sudhakar, previous experience, what do you have before coming to Redshift?
So I have working experience in Athena on Glue on QuickSight, and so in our organization, so we work on some other tools as well. So yeah, there are a set of tools and technologies where I have already worked.
Okay. Basically, you are from a DBA background or a AWS background, Sudhakar?
So I am from DB background, but yeah, I'm what can we say? So I'm kind of very curious or keen to learn all the services that are available. But so you know this solutions architect, right? Where
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
have, yeah, yeah. So yeah, those, I mean, there we cannot cover everything in detail, but we'll get to know at a high level what each of the services available, what are its pros and cons, when to use, and different use cases. So yeah, I have explored on other AWS services also, in addition to what I have just mentioned.
Okay. Okay.
Hi, Sudhakar.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, I joined little bit late. What is you are currently working on Redshift? I don't know. Joined little bit late. I didn't listen or the starting it all.
Yes, yes.
Okay. I think if you learn Redshift, means there are two roles, right? One is admin side, another one is development side.
Yeah, yeah. So if you're learning Redshift, so it will help you to be a DB engineer, a DB administrator, or a data analyst. So I mean, so if you learn Redshift, it doesn't mean you'll become a data analyst, but for a data analyst role, if a company has their data infrastructure or in a Redshift, then for sure you need to know how to interact with Redshift, how to retrieve the data, things like that.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. Thanks for your time, and hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, okay, sir.
Uh,
Thank you. Thanks
Thanks,
for the
Sudhakar.
second.
yeah.
Bye bye.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Sudhakar. Yeah. Thank you.